Joined by Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, you're one of our most popular segments of the year and a lot of feedback whenever we speak. So, I remember the end of last year you said that Albanese didn't have much time to kind of turn the ship around. What do you say this year at the same time?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I hope the feedback's good. I think what we're looking at here is we are headed now for an election that is going to be defined by the forgotten people, the forgotten Australians. So 2022 very much defined by middle-class Australians jumping off the Liberal pile, often long-time Liberal voting families, those sort of traditions that run through families, jumping off, whether it was to Labor, in seats like Bennelong, or whether it was, infamously to the Teals and those seats, that defined 2022. I think what we're going to see in 2025 is this forgotten people, the outer suburbans, the regional voters, and particularly this is going to impact on Labor. And it's very much, of course, about the failures to sort of really being seen to stand up and stand strong on cost of living and do something about that. But there's deeper trends here, because this is not a uniquely Australian thing. We are seeing across the world, including most infamously, just in America, that parties of the left are losing those working class constituencies through sort of years of neglect of economics, that they have abandoned sort of the economic pitch that, the relationship with those voters was based upon. And I think we're seeing it now in Australia. It's been coming for some time. We've been watching Labor's primary in those so-called red wall working class constituencies fall over time. And I think what we've seen in the post-Voice sort of era of, this sort of timidity and sort of band-aid approach to cost of living, I think we've really accelerated that. And I think that is going to be now the defining piece of this 2025 election. In one sense, the Libs have taken the pain in their loss of those middle-class voters, and it's hard to see them coming back in a big way. There might be sort of the odd seat here or there where they might pick up back from Labor, but Labor up to now has sort of been a bit insulated from its pain moment, because its margins in those red walls have been so big. Well, as I said, they've been eroded. And I think this is the electorate when we finally start to see those, as I say, those forgotten people really making their voices heard.
Okay, so how does that play out next year in terms of how the electorate votes and where they might shift?
Yeah. So I think, I'd be looking very much out of suburban Sydney and out of suburban Melbourne. I think we've already sort of seen an erosion of the Labor vote in Queensland. It's hard for that to get too much lower. I mean, it could on a really bad night, it could. But I think the big moves will be out of suburban. So I think, your famous Western Sydney, I think Western, Northern, and even some of the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. I think I'd be watching those seats. The seat that I grew up in as a kid, Hawke, the booth my parents voted in when I was a kid was a 60% primary vote for Labor booth. Those sorts of booths now are contestable. That's where we're at. That's a lot of years. I'm an old man these days, but over that time, those sorts of booths have become contestable. Those sorts of electorates have become contestable. And I think also the regional areas, I'd be keeping a very close eye on sort of industrialised regional areas. Think the Hunter. I'd be keeping a very close eye on those seats there. As I say, it's years of sort of economic and service neglect by the party that was supposed to be on their side that has led to this kind of erosion.
Simon, why do you think Peter Dutton has become so competitive? It was really hard to turn around what happened with Morrison in just 3 years, but he's now within striking distance.
Yeah, I think it's very much about Labor's failures. We've sort of joked on this show before that, governments get voted out rather than oppositions get voted in. It's very much about that. I think, effectively there's a disconnect here that's this government was seen to put so much effort and so much priority onto the voice. And if you look at those voice referendum results, that now mirrors beautifully where this electoral hurt is coming from. And so what's happened is those voters, they're saying to us in the groups, we heard a lot from them in the lead up to Voice. They wanted us to vote for this thing. We didn't like the way they treated us in that lead up to the Voice. No, they never explained things, but this seemed to be a real priority for government. And then they kind of disappeared from our lives. And this cost of living crisis took over. So the moment we really needed them, they weren't there. That's a major driver of it. But also, there is certainly, Peter Dutton doesn't play the bogeyman role in these outer suburban regional areas like he does in the sort of the middle class electorates back in the city, where in those middle class electorates, there's very much this sense of values disconnect around Peter Dutton. Not so in those outer suburban regions. They like sort of a bit more socially conservative. I won't say they're completely socially conservative, but a more socially conservative approach plays well into those regions. And his willingness to stand up with some bold ideas like nuclear. So people in the groups, they may not particularly think that nuclear is the way, but they like that at least we're sort of looking at some big alternatives and big ideas to solve these kinds of problems.
Yeah, and that has been consistent, absolutely, in terms of the feedback that you've brought us all year, Simon. It's been a great pleasure. Yes, the feedback is good, mostly. Not 100%, you can't have that, but mostly it is good. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time this year.
Thanks, Laura. Have a good one.